At my husband's company dinner, laughter rolled across the ballroom like a wave. Ethan Caldwell, one of his coworkers, swirled his glass of scotch and asked loudly, "Tell me, how does it feel to be a loser? Your husband makes millions while you just sit at home arranging flowers." His words sliced through the chatter, sparking a chorus of laughter, not polite or nervous, but sharp and cruel. Even my husband, Spencer, joined in, raising his champagne glass as though mocking me were a sport. That was the moment something inside me shifted. 22 years of marriage, and it took one public humiliation to make me realize I'd been living in the shadow of a man who didn't even see me. I smiled, calm and deliberate, and turned toward Robert Holt, the CEO. "Tell me, Robert," I asked sweetly, "how does it feel knowing that this so-called loser owns 67% of your company?" The laughter died instantly. Forks paused midair. Holt's face drained of color. The silence that followed was absolute, a silence that announced the beginning of their downfall. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to that morning when I was still playing the role of the dutiful corporate wife, unaware that by nightfall, I'd reveal the truth about who really controlled their precious empire. Before we continue, if you've ever been dismissed or underestimated despite everything you've contributed, make sure to subscribe. It's free, and it helps spread these stories to others who've felt the same. Now, let's begin. Spencer's alarm hadn't truly woken him in years. 3 snoozes every morning, while I rose at 5:30 to begin the invisible labor of his perfect life. My day always started in the kitchen, egg whites folded without a single trace of yolk, whole grain toast golden, but never burnt, fresh orange juice with no pulp because, as he often reminded me, it bothered his digestion. After 22 years, I could complete the ritual blindfolded. At 6:45, right on schedule, Spencer's voice echoed from upstairs. "Catherine, where's my Harvard tie?" He knew exactly where it was, 3rd drawer, left side, arranged by color. But asking me reinforced what mattered most to him, that I existed to make his world seamless. I carried his coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, in the Harvard Business School mug his mother gifted him, and found him standing helpless in a closet filled with $40,000 worth of suits. "The red one?" I asked, already reaching for it. "You've got the Morrison presentation today." "Actually," he corrected, taking the coffee without a thank you, "it's the Singapore merger finalization." "But yes, the red one. Power color." He said it like I hadn't memorized his calendar for 2 decades. Like I hadn't typed up his talking points last night while he watched golf. As I tightened his Windsor knot, he scrolled through emails, smiling at messages from people who actually mattered to him. "Don't wait up tonight," he said. "Company dinner at the Marriott. Black dress would be appropriate." Appropriate. That word defined my entire existence. After 2 decades, I wasn't a person anymore. I was either appropriate or inappropriate, never simply myself. Lunch with my mother at the country club was its own quiet punishment. She sat across from me at our usual table, her posture straight as a ruler, eyes sharp as ever. "Spencer must be thrilled about the promotion," she said in that polished tone she used when she was about to wound. "Senior Vice President, your father would have been impressed." I almost laughed. My father would have been horrified. He'd sent me to Columbia Business School, celebrated when Goldman Sachs offered me an analyst position, and believed I'd conquer Wall Street, not become a suburban ornament whose greatest talent was remembering how her husband liked his coffee. "You look tired, dear," my mother continued, examining me with clinical precision. "Are you taking those vitamins I told you about?" "I'm fine, Mother. You used to say that at Columbia too, right before you quit." She placed her fork down, her Caesar salad untouched. "For him, I didn't quit. I made a choice." "Yes," she said coolly, "and look where that choice brought you." She gestured toward my pearl earrings, my St. John suit, the entire facade of perfection I wore daily. "Playing dress-up for his colleagues while your mind wastes away." I wanted to tell her everything about Greystone Capital, the investment firm I'd built in secret with my father's insurance payout, about how I owned 67% of Nexus Industries through a chain of shell companies, and how Spencer's career had existed only because I'd orchestrated it from the shadows. But I couldn't. Not yet. The rest of the afternoon passed in preparation for the dinner. Hair appointment at 2, to cover the gray Spencer pretended not to notice. Manicure at 3:30, neutral pink because anything bolder was trying too hard. Home by 4:45 to put on the black dress he'd chosen for me days ago. As I applied my makeup, my phone buzzed, a message from Grace Ellison, my attorney and the only person who knew the truth. Greystone quarterly reports attached. Your portfolio exceeded projections by 47%. You now control enough shares to replace the entire board if necessary. I deleted the message instantly, a habit born from years of hiding who I really was. Spencer believed I spent my days at book clubs and charity luncheons. He had no idea that I'd been methodically buying up shares of his company, using the inheritance he thought had gone to our mortgage and his golf club fees. At 6:15, the doorbell rang. Spencer was home, just long enough to change shirts and cologne before the dinner. I had to admit, he looked good in his evening suit. The streaks of silver at his temples gave him that distinguished air that made junior associates hang on his every word. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at his Rolex. "We can't be late. Robert wants us at the executive table." Us. As if my presence meant anything more than a polished accessory, a pair of cuff links with a heartbeat. The drive to the Marriott was silent except for Spencer's phone calls, 3 discussions about quarterly projections, 2 mentions of the Singapore merger, and 1 laughter-filled exchange with Ethan about a junior analyst's mistake. Not once did he look at me or ask about my day. As we pulled into the valet lane, he finally spoke. "Remember, Catherine, just smile and let me handle the conversation. These people don't care about your little hobbies." My little hobbies. The ones that had turned into an investment portfolio worth more than his entire career. The shares that could end his professional life with a single phone call. "Of course, Spencer," I replied, perfecting the same practiced smile I'd worn for 22 years. I had bled alone in our bedroom, too afraid to call Spencer and interrupt one of his precious meetings. The second time, during his much-celebrated Singapore merger, I'd driven myself to the hospital. I told the nurses my husband was away on business, then held my own hand through the contractions and the silence that followed. I thought about the nights I'd spent alone in our king-sized bed while he entertained clients, the birthdays he'd missed, the anniversary dinners canceled for urgent board meetings. Each absence had carved away the woman I'd once been at Columbia, until only the outline of Spencer's dutiful wife remained. Ethan's voice still carried through the ballroom, though it reached me as if through water. "Maybe we should pitch a reality show," he said, laughter lacing his words. "Real housewives of failed ambitions." The crowd roared again, Spencer's laugh ringing loudest of all. My hands trembled at first, but then stillness. My heartbeat, which had been thrumming like a trapped bird, slowed to a measured calm. Something inside me, something long buried under years of polite smiles, neutral nail polish, and appropriate dresses, began to crack open. The wine glass was still in my hand. I set it down gently, the crystal base meeting the table with a soft, deliberate click. My wedding ring, 3 carats, chosen by Spencer's mother, caught the chandelier's glow as I released the stem. For 22 years, I had lived in quiet fear. Fear of disrupting Spencer's career. Fear of embarrassing him. Fear of being too much, too loud, too visible. But as the laughter rippled around me, as strangers and so-called friends mocked the life I had built, I felt that fear dissolve. The documents from Greystone Capital waited in my safe at home. 7 years of careful maneuvering, of quiet acquisitions through shell corporations and private equity arms. 67% ownership of Nexus Industries, all under my control. Spencer's promotion, Ethan's position, Robert Delaney's CEO title, every bit of it existed because I allowed it to. They simply didn't know yet. But they were about to. I rose from my seat, slow and precise, smoothing the fabric of my black dress as I stood. The laughter still echoed across the marble and glass, but something in my posture, some subtle shift, made Ethan falter mid-chuckle. "You're absolutely right, Ethan," I said, my voice slicing through the noise like silk through steel. "I am a loser." He grinned wider, thinking he'd won, raising his scotch in triumph. The room leaned in, hungry for more humiliation. A loser, I continued, who owns 67% of your company. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then another. Then another. Ethan's glass stopped halfway to his lips. A fork clattered somewhere nearby. I turned toward Robert Delaney, the man who had barely acknowledged my presence for 7 years. His bourbon froze midair, his expression melting from amusement to disbelief. "Tell me, Robert," I said evenly, "how does it feel to know that the housewife you've all been laughing at controls Nexus Industries through Greystone Capital?" The silence that followed was complete. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen 3 rooms away, the whisper of Helen Delaney's silk dress as she shifted in her seat. Then came the sound of shattering crystal. Spencer's champagne flute slipped from his hand, splintering against the marble like a gunshot. Golden liquid spread across the floor, catching the chandelier light as it pooled around his shoes. No one moved to clean it. No one moved at all. "That's not possible," Robert finally stammered, his voice cracking before he cleared his throat. "Greystone Capital is a private equity firm out of Manhattan. We've never met the principals." "No," I replied, walking toward his table, my heels striking the marble with calm precision. "You haven't. But you've met their representative. Every quarter for the last 7 years. Confusion clouded his eyes as I continued. "You've sent reports to a post office box in White Plains. Deposited dividend checks into accounts controlled by shell companies. Followed board decisions delivered by attorneys who never revealed their client's identity." I stopped in front of him, close enough to see the sweat glistening above his lip. 7 years ago, Nexus was 48 hours from bankruptcy. Your stock had fallen 70%. 3 major clients had withdrawn their contracts. The board was meeting every 6 hours, desperate for a miracle. My voice carried across the frozen room. Even the waiters stood motionless, trays suspended midair. "Then Greystone Capital appeared," I said. "A bailout offer that seemed too good to be true. $40 million in immediate funding, full debt restructuring, new lines of credit. The only condition was majority ownership, 67%, to be exact." I withdrew my phone from my purse, opened an encrypted document, and placed it on Robert's table. The Greystone Capital letterhead gleamed on the screen, my signature unmistakable beneath it. My money, my terms, my control. Janet had her phone up again, recording everything. 2 executives by the bar were furiously texting, likely their lawyers. Ethan hadn't moved. His scotch hung suspended halfway to his mouth, his face pale and motionless. "For 7 years," I continued, my voice stronger now, "every major decision, every hire, every bonus, every merger required approval from Greystone. From me." I turned toward Spencer, who stood frozen in the spreading puddle of champagne, his complexion the color of parchment. "Even your promotion to senior vice president, Spencer," I said softly. "The board wanted an outsider. But Greystone insisted on internal advancement." I let the pause linger. "I insisted." "I thought you deserved the chance to prove yourself," I said quietly. Spencer's mouth opened, then closed again, the practiced confidence he wore like a tailored suit now collapsing into silence. "The Singapore merger that made your career?" I continued. "Greystone provided the bridge financing. The Morrison account you're so proud of? I played golf with Morrison myself to finalize that deal. You just presented the paperwork I had already negotiated." "Catherine, how is this possible?" His voice barely registered above a whisper. The executive tone that once commanded boardrooms was gone, replaced by disbelief. "The Greystone deal saved my career. I was promoted because of that merger. I thought Greystone was a Wall Street consortium." "It was," I said, stepping closer, "one investor. Your wife. The loser who arranges flowers." At the far end of the room, Robert Delaney fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. "This has to be verified," he muttered. "Legal, someone needs to confirm this." "Go ahead," I replied calmly. "Call your head counsel. Ask about the emergency board meeting on Tuesday. He received the notice an hour ago." Robert's complexion drained as he held the phone to his ear. His voice quivered. "Yes, this is Delaney. Confirm the—" A tinny voice answered, echoing through the speaker. "Yes, sir." Greystone Capital has called an emergency meeting. They hold the votes to replace the entire board if they wish. The color vanished from Robert's face. Ethan finally found his voice, though it came out ragged. That's impossible. You're just a housewife. You don't even work. I work, I said evenly, turning toward him. I've worked every single day for 7 years, buying positions, acquiring shares through secondary markets, managing an $800 million portfolio. I just did it from my home office while you thought I was at book club. Helen Delaney finally spoke, her voice sharp with panic. Robert, what does this mean? The house in the Hamptons? The yacht? It means, I said, picking up my purse with deliberate precision, that the free ride is over. Every face that had been laughing minutes earlier now looked stricken, pale, confused, fearful. They resembled passengers realizing the captain had already abandoned ship. Enjoy the rest of your dinner, I said smoothly. Monday morning, there will be a full forensic audit of executive spending, every corporate card transaction, every entertainment receipt, every falsified expense report. I began walking toward the exit, my heels striking the marble in steady, rhythmic beats, each one a countdown. Tuesday, emergency board meeting. We'll be discussing new leadership. Wednesday, replacements finalized. Then I paused, glancing back over my shoulder. Oh, Ethan, I said, letting his name linger in the air. You might want to update your resume. That trip to Vegas last month, the one you labeled client entertainment? We have the security footage. The ballroom erupted. Spencer was calling my name with rising desperation. Robert shouted into his phone, demanding legal options. Helen shrieked about losing their properties. Ethan was already babbling excuses about Las Vegas. But I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. 22 years of invisibility had taught me many things, but the most important lesson was this: the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served at the exact temperature, at the exact moment, to the exact people. Outside, the valet handed me the keys to a sleek black Tesla, a car Spencer didn't even know I owned. I slid behind the wheel, the soft hum of the engine replacing the chaos behind me. The empire they'd built with my money was already cracking. Autopilot guided me home through the quiet Connecticut streets. My phone buzzed endlessly, 17 missed calls from Spencer, 3 from Robert Delaney, 1 from a number that was probably Ethan. I silenced it and watched the city lights smear into gold and silver ribbons through the windshield. For the first time in decades, I felt it control. The house was dark when I pulled into the garage at 11:47 p.m. Only one light burned, seeping from under the door to Spencer's study. He'd beaten me home, probably breaking every speed limit in the state to do it. I brewed myself a cup of oolong tea, the expensive kind I kept hidden behind the flour tin, and climbed the stairs. The faint sound of paper shuffling and frantic typing drifted down the hall. By 6 a.m., I found him exactly as I expected, disheveled, surrounded by chaos. 3 laptops open, a fortress of coffee cups around his desk, shareholder databases glowing on each screen. His usually immaculate hair stuck out at absurd angles. "We need to talk," he said hoarsely, voice rough from a sleepless night. I poured coffee from my private stash, Blue Mountain from Jamaica, $70 a pound, and sat across from him in the same leather chair where I'd listened to years of excuses. "Is it true?" he asked. "All of it," I said, taking a long sip. "Every word." His trembling hands pushed a printed document toward me, a Securities and Exchange Commission record showing Greystone Capital's controlling stake in Nexus Industries. "Why didn't you tell me, Catherine? We could have been a power couple. We could have run the company together. Think of what we could have accomplished if I'd known." A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it, sharp and dry as burnt coffee. "Spencer, you introduced me at the Christmas party as the wife who used to have career ambitions. You told your golf buddies I dabble in investments like it's a cute hobby." He flinched but pressed on, desperation overriding humiliation. "That was just talk. You know how those guys are." I had to maintain an image. "An image of what?" I asked. "A successful man with a decorative wife? A breadwinner with a dependent? Tell me, Spencer, in this fantasy where we run Nexus together, would I still be making your breakfast at 5:30 every morning?" The doorbell rang at precisely 9 a.m., sparing him an answer. When I opened the door, Grace Ellison stood there in a charcoal suit, 3 associates behind her carrying banker's boxes. Their expressions were sharp, efficient, lethal. "Good morning, Catherine," Grace said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Ready to change some lives?" I led them upstairs to my office, the one Spencer believed held my scrapbooking supplies. His jaw fell open as Grace's team transformed it into a war room, spreading documents, laptops, and evidence across every inch of space. The era of the invisible wife was over. "The forensic audit is complete," Grace said, her tone crisp and steady as she spread a stack of reports across my desk like a dealer revealing a hand of loaded cards. "And it's worse than we expected." She opened her laptop, turning the screen toward me. Security footage filled the display, Ethan boarding the company jet with 2 women who were most definitely not clients. The timestamp showed a Wednesday afternoon when he'd claimed to be locked in budget meetings. 17 trips to Las Vegas in the past year, she continued, scrolling through flight logs. All expensed as client entertainment. Total cost, $450,000. She clicked to the next file. Robert Delaney's brother-in-law's consulting firm, $3 million in contracts for services that never happened. The company doesn't even have an office. It's registered to a residential address in New Jersey. The deeper she went, the uglier it became. 7 years of unchecked greed, of executives treating Nexus Industries like a personal ATM while I stayed invisible in the background. "We can end them all," Grace said finally, eyes bright with cold satisfaction. "The question is, how much damage do you want to inflict?" I thought of the 22 years I'd spent being introduced as Spencer's better half, as though I'd never been whole on my own. 22 years of having my intelligence dismissed, my efforts minimized, my presence reduced to decoration. I met her gaze. "All of it," I said. "I want them to feel what it's like to lose everything that ever made them feel superior." Spencer hovered in the doorway like a ghost, the color drained from his face. Grace noticed him and gave a sharp, professional smile. "Mr. Whitmore," she said smoothly, "I suggest you retain separate counsel. This is about to get complicated." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Lily's face filled the screen, a photo from her high school graduation, her eyes full of the same fire I'd buried years ago. "Mom," she said when I answered, her voice breathless, shaken. "Dad just called me. He was crying. He said you've destroyed his career." "What's going on?" I stepped out onto the balcony, away from Spencer's desperate stare. "Your father and his colleagues humiliated me at a company dinner," I said. "They called me a loser for staying home." They laughed. Even your father laughed. Silence stretched between Connecticut and California. "So," I continued softly, "I told them the truth. That I own the company. That I've owned it all along." "You own Dad's company?" Lily's voice shot up an octave. "I do. Through Greystone Capital. I saved Nexus from bankruptcy 7 years ago." I stayed quiet while they took the credit. There was a long pause before she exhaled sharply. "So you've been running everything while Dad played the genius?" "Yes." "Holy Mom, that's the most badass thing I've ever heard," she said, laughing through disbelief. "It's about time you stopped letting him treat you like staff. Remember when he made you skip my recital for that client dinner? When he forgot your birthday 3 years in a row? When he told everyone at Thanksgiving you gave up your little career dreams for him?" I had forgotten she'd witnessed it all, quietly absorbing every slight. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. "For standing up. For once." When I returned to my office, Grace had set up a laptop showing Nexus's internal communication feed. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said. An anonymous email had gone out to every employee 2 hours earlier. The subject line read, "What your executives don't want you to know." The message contained excerpts from the audit, Ethan's Vegas trips, Robert's nepotism, million-dollar bonuses handed out weeks before mass layoffs. Within minutes, Slack channels across the company exploded. Years of suppressed resentment poured out in text form, a digital uprising in real time. "Did you send this?" I asked. Grace lifted a shoulder in mock innocence. "Whistleblowers are protected by law. Could have been anyone with access." My inbox was already overflowing. Messages from employees, some angry, some emotional, all raw. The most unexpected came from Janet, Spencer's secretary. "Mrs. Whitmore, we always knew you were different. You remembered our names. You asked about our families. You treated us like people, not furniture. Thank you for holding them accountable." More letters followed, accounts of ignored harassment complaints, women denied promotions, executives stealing credit for others' work. The revolution had begun on its own, fueled by truth and long-buried frustration. Behind me, Spencer stood frozen, watching his empire crumble on 3 different screens. "You planned this," he whispered. "You've been planning this for years." "No, Spencer," I said, turning to face him. "I've been surviving for years. The planning started last night when you laughed while they called me a loser." Grace checked her watch and smiled faintly. "It's 8:58. Shall we watch the show?" At exactly 9 a.m., she refreshed her browser. A headline appeared on the financial news site. "Breaking: Nexus Industries under SEC investigation following whistleblower report." Seconds later, my phone buzzed violently, notifications cascading one after another. The audit had been sent to every board member, to the SEC's enforcement division, and to journalists at the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and Reuters. Grace's team had executed a surgical strike designed for maximum devastation. "Ethan Caldwell is about to have a very bad morning," she said, pulling up the Nexus security feed. The timestamp read 9:17. Ethan sat at his desk, eyes glued to an email outlining his Vegas trips, fraudulent expenses, and buried HR complaints. His face shifted from confusion to panic to horror. By 9:42, 2 security guards appeared outside his glass office. The entire 10th floor watched as they escorted him out, forcing him to hand over his company car keys at reception. Someone, likely one of the assistants he'd tormented, was recording the entire scene. "That video will be viral within the hour," Grace predicted. She was wrong. It took 20 minutes. Behind us, Spencer paced like a trapped animal, his phone lighting up again and again. "The office is in chaos," he muttered, reading aloud the texts flooding in. "Robert is having a breakdown." 3 senior executives had just handed in their resignations, and the company's stock was plummeting. Spencer's voice trembled as he pleaded, "Catherine, please, you have to call this off." I turned toward him and, for the first time that morning, truly saw the man behind the title. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt crumpled, his hands unsteady. This wasn't the polished executive I'd once married. This was Spencer stripped of his armor of success. "Call it off," I repeated quietly. "Did you ever call off the laughter when they mocked me? Or the 22 years of being introduced as your better half, like a decorative addition instead of a person?" He stammered, "That's different." "You're right," I said evenly. "It is. Because this is business, Spencer. What you did to me, that was personal." Tuesday arrived under a veil of drizzle and gray clouds, perfect weather for what I could only describe as a corporate funeral. I dressed with care, pulling from the back of my closet the red Chanel suit I'd bought years ago but never worn. Spencer had once called it too aggressive for a woman. Today, that was precisely the point. Grace and I reached Nexus headquarters at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the emergency board meeting. The entire building felt charged, thick with tension, as if everyone inside was holding their breath. "Mrs. Whitmore," the security guard greeted, frowning slightly. "You're not on the visitor list." "I'm not visiting," I replied, handing him my Greystone Capital business card. "I own the building." The elevator carried us to the 40th floor with a quiet hum, each second stretching like ceremony. Grace clutched a briefcase packed with documents that could end careers. I held 22 years of humiliation distilled into resolve. The boardroom door, a slab of heavy mahogany built to intimidate, stood before me. I didn't knock. 12 board members sat around the polished table, each looking like a defendant awaiting a verdict. At the head sat Robert Delaney, or what used to be the head, before my arrival. He looked exhausted, aged a decade overnight. I approached his chair and waited silently beside it. "That's the chairman's seat," he said, voice cracking. "Yes," I replied. The silence stretched until he gathered his papers with shaking hands and slid to a side chair. I took my place at the head of the table. Greystone Capital is no longer a silent partner, I announced, my voice filling the room. As majority shareholder, I'm exercising my right to direct oversight of this company. Robert attempted a last stand. You can't just. I cut him off by sliding a thick folder across the table. The dull thud it made carried more authority than any argument. Embezzlement. Fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty, I recited calmly. Your brother-in-law's sham consulting firm. The Miami condo you purchased with company funds. Would you like me to go on? His face paled, crumbling like parchment left in the sun. Effective immediately, your resignation is accepted, I continued. Your golden parachute is revoked, and your stock options are void. Security is waiting outside. 30 years, he whispered, broken. I built this company for 30 years. No, Robert, I said. You inherited a company I rescued from bankruptcy and then spent 7 years plundering. There's a difference. Security entered, 2 guards who probably earned minimum wage while Robert had pocketed million-dollar bonuses. There was a dark symmetry in watching them escort him out. When the door shut, I turned to the rest of the board. Now, let's discuss new leadership. One of them cleared his throat. We should conduct a search. Hire a firm. Evaluate candidates. No need, I said. Dr. Naomi Clark will assume the role of CEO effective immediately. The table erupted in protests. She's only an operations manager, one man argued. We need someone with CEO experience. The shareholders will revolt. I am the shareholders, I reminded them coolly. And Dr. Clark has essentially been running this company for 5 years while the rest of you perfected your golf swings. Right on cue, the door opened and Naomi stepped in. She wore a simple navy suit, modest but commanding, with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to prove herself. 2 assistants wheeled in a set of presentation boards behind her. Gentlemen, she began, her tone confident and even. And Mrs. Whitmore. This restructuring plan will save Nexus $50 million annually while protecting every non-executive position. She walked them through the details, cutting executive luxuries instead of workers, funding innovation instead of private yachts, promoting by merit rather than connection. When she finished, I stood. This is what competence looks like, I said. You've simply forgotten, because for years you've been promoting based on golf handicaps rather than ability. That evening, I found Spencer in the kitchen, staring blankly at his phone as if it had delivered his obituary. In a way, it had. Brennan Corporation offered me a position, he murmured. Entry-level business development. 53 years old, and they want me to start as an account coordinator. The same job he'd held at 25. The same one he'd mocked others for clinging to at 40. They know I'm toxic now, he said bitterly. Everyone does. My own wife didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. They think I'm either an oblivious fool or a liar who hid the truth. The irony was exquisite, poetic even. Revenge served at exactly the right temperature. How does it feel? I asked, pouring myself a glass of wine, the good kind I no longer needed to hide. To have your entire professional value reduced to your spouse's shadow? To be defined not by what you achieved, but by who you married. He lifted his gaze then, and for the first time in 22 years, I saw something unfamiliar in his eyes, understanding. But understanding and redemption are 2 currencies, and his account was long overdrawn. The doorbell rang sharply at 7 o'clock Wednesday morning. Spencer was still in the guest room, while I sat in my office reviewing Naomi's transition plans for Nexus. When I opened the door, Mother stood there, silver hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour, wearing the same pearl necklace Father had given her for their 30th anniversary. She never came unannounced. Never. The entire country club knows, she said briskly, stepping past me into the foyer. Helen Delaney was in tears over losing her house. Helen Caldwell already unfriended me on Facebook, as if Ethan's gambling trips to Vegas were somehow my fault. I led her into my office, bracing for the usual lecture about propriety and restraint. I expected her to remind me that dignity meant suffering quietly, beautifully, never publicly. Instead, she lowered herself carefully into Grace's chair and pulled a worn manila folder from her purse. Her hands trembled as she unlatched the worn folder and spread it open across my desk. "Do you know what these are?" she asked quietly. I leaned closer. Inside were my old transcripts from Columbia, stamped with a grade point average of 3.9. My acceptance letter to Harvard Business School. A job offer from Goldman Sachs for an analyst position, starting salary neatly typed at the bottom. Even now, it would be considered remarkable. "You kept these?" I whispered. 23 years, she said softly. "I've carried them for 23 years, waiting for you to remember who you were before him." She laid the papers out in front of me one by one, like ghosts of the woman I might have become. "You were brilliant," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Not just intelligent, brilliant. Professor Callan said you were the most promising student he'd had in a decade. Goldman fought 2 other firms to sign you. And you gave it all up for a man who introduced you as his better half, as if you were just a fraction of yourself." Tears streaked down her cheeks, something I had seen only twice before, at my father's funeral, and the day I told her I was leaving Columbia. "When your father died," she said, "and left that insurance payout, $2 million, I thought you'd use it to go back to school, to start your own firm, to become the woman he raised you to be." I looked down. Instead, I said quietly, I used it to save Spencer's company. I let him believe it was venture capital. I let him stand on stages and accept awards for being a business genius when it was my money that saved him. She reached across the desk and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "But I'm proud of you now, Catherine," she said, her voice breaking, "for finally fighting back. Your father would be too." We sat there for a long time, saying nothing, 2 generations of women who had been trained to support others instead of being supported themselves. Women taught to stay silent when they should have been seen. On Thursday evening, Spencer knocked on my office door, the first time he'd ever done that. He was wearing the gray suit I had bought him for our 20th anniversary. It hung loose now, evidence of the weight he'd lost in the past 4 days. A manila envelope rested in his hand. "Can we talk?" he asked. I gestured toward the chair, but he remained standing, shifting uneasily like a student waiting for reprimand. "I've had divorce papers drawn up," he said, placing the envelope on my desk. "I'm not contesting anything. You can have everything, the house, the cars, the portfolio." "How generous of you," I said coolly. "Giving me what I already paid for." He winced, but pressed on. "I just need something, Catherine. Some dignity. Maybe a consultant role at Nexus. A reference letter saying I left for personal reasons. Anything that doesn't make me look like a complete failure." I studied him, the man I had once loved enough to sacrifice everything for. His shoulders, once squared with confidence, had curved inward. His hands, which used to move with authority when he told stories, now hung limp at his sides. "You want dignity?" I asked quietly. "Where was my dignity when you laughed as Ethan called me a loser? Where was it when you told people I dabbled in investments? When you introduced me as someone who used to have ambition?" He murmured, "That was different." "You're right," I said coldly. "It was different. You had 22 years to offer me dignity, and every single day, you chose not to. You treated me like an employee, a secretary, a maid with a marriage certificate. Why should I show you mercy you never gave me?" He stared at the floor, his reflection faint in the polished hardwood. "Because you're better than me," he whispered. "You always were. I just never wanted to admit it." Before I could answer, a car door slammed outside. Lily's voice floated through the open window, bright, laughing, alive. My daughter, home from Stanford without warning. "Mom? Dad?" She called as she stepped through the door, her phone in hand. "We need to talk." She found us in my office and froze. "You're getting divorced, aren't you?" Neither of us spoke, and that silence told her everything. She scrolled through her phone, then held it up. "Look at this." It was a photo from her 5th birthday. A Barbie cake, candles glowing. Spencer and I flanking her, smiling genuinely. "This was before Dad made senior VP," she said. "Before Mom's investments. Before all the garbage you think matters. We were happy with less." "Lily," Spencer began, but she cut him off. "No, Dad. You don't get to talk. You laughed while Mom was being humiliated. And Mom, you've made your point. You've destroyed Dad professionally. Ethan is selling used cars. Robert Delaney is under federal investigation. What more do you want? She looked between us, my eyes in a younger face, blazing with frustration. I don't want to lose my family to revenge. Can't we save something? I looked down at the photo again. The woman in that picture had already given up Harvard, already spent her father's inheritance to save her husband's dream. The happiness in that frozen moment had been built entirely on my unseen sacrifices. That family never really existed, sweetheart, I said gently. It was me pretending everything was fine while I slowly disappeared. Later that night, 2 o'clock in the morning, I wandered through the house like a ghost haunting her own memories. The dining room where I'd hosted Spencer's colleagues. The living room where I'd smiled through countless book club meetings while the other wives discussed their husbands' promotions. Eventually, I found myself in Spencer's study, or what used to be a study. In the bottom drawer of his desk, I discovered it, the business plan for his first startup. My handwriting filled the margins, financial projections, market analysis, strategies. Every line a reminder of what had always been true. The cover page read, Whitmore Innovations, a business proposal by Spencer Whitmore. Not Catherine and Spencer Whitmore. Not with contributions from Catherine Whitmore, just Spencer, taking credit for my intellect while I took credit for keeping his house in order. I poured myself a glass of his 30-year-old Macallan, the one he'd been saving for a special occasion, and raised it toward the empty room, a silent toast to the invisible woman who had finally been seen. The whiskey seared my throat, but not nearly as sharply as the truth. I had won everything and lost everything in the same breath. Victory, when it came, tasted like ashes, luxurious, expensive ashes, but ashes all the same. At 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed. Grace's name appeared on the screen. Did I wake you? She asked, though we both knew sleep had been a stranger to me for days. What is it? The board wants to move the emergency shareholder meeting to Friday, she said. Same venue as last week's dinner, the Marriott Grand Ballroom. They think familiar ground will work in their favor. I almost laughed. They wanted to return to the place where they'd once humiliated me, not realizing they were giving me the perfect stage for their downfall. Tell them yes, I said. And, Grace, make sure the media knows. I want cameras. Friday arrived wrapped in sunlight, a kind of cosmic irony. I dressed deliberately, choosing a white Armani suit I had purchased years earlier but never dared to wear. Spencer had called it too bold, which made it ideal for today. The Marriott's Grand Ballroom looked entirely different. Gone were the round tables where the executives had laughed at me. In their place stood 300 chairs facing a raised platform, a projection screen stretching across the back wall. It was impossible to miss what was coming. The room filled quickly, shareholders, employees, reporters. CNN had sent a crew. The Wall Street Journal had 3 journalists in attendance. Every major financial blog had a representative. From backstage, I spotted Spencer entering quietly and choosing a seat in the very last row, as if he could slip away once the storm began. He had no idea how fierce it would be. At exactly 10 o'clock, I stepped onto the stage, the click of my heels echoing through the silence like a gavel striking. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady, carrying to the farthest corner. My name is Catherine Whitmore, and through Greystone Capital, I am the majority shareholder of Nexus Industries. Behind me, the presentation came to life, a single slide displaying Greystone's 67% ownership stake. For 7 years, I continued, I have remained silent while executives treated this company as their personal playground. Silent as they dismantled its values, turning it into an old boys club built on my investment. The next slide revealed Ethan Caldwell's Vegas receipts, photos, invoices, even security footage. The same Ethan Caldwell who called me a loser housewife last week spent $450,000 of company funds on personal entertainment. Then came Robert Delaney's fraudulent contracts, $3 million, funneled into his brother-in-law's fake consulting firm. A graph followed, executive bonuses towering above employee layoffs like monuments to greed. While 200 employees were dismissed last Christmas, I said, These men rewarded themselves with seven-figure bonuses. A shocked murmur rippled through the audience. Cameras were raised, phones recorded. Good. By noon, I wanted this everywhere. Effective immediately, I announced, Nexus Industries will undergo full restructuring. New leadership. New culture. New values. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal raised a hand. Mrs. Whitmore, what about your husband's involvement in all this? I found Spencer's face among the crowd. 300 people sat between us, yet in that instant, it felt like only the two of us existed. 22 years of marriage condensed into a heartbeat. Spencer Whitmore has submitted his resignation, I said evenly. An internal investigation confirmed that he knowingly benefited from executive misconduct while pretending ignorance. Spencer began to rise, but I didn't pause. Mr. Whitmore will receive no severance, no references, and no golden parachute. The man who built his career on his wife's money, her connections, and her strategies, while calling her a trophy, will no longer be associated with Nexus Industries in any capacity. Phones swiveled toward him as he froze mid-step. The entire room watched him stumble toward the exit, every camera capturing his retreat. Within minutes, the footage would go viral. The executive who didn't know his wife owned the company. The business world deserves transparency, I said, turning back to the audience. They should know the kind of man they're dealing with, someone who laughed when his wife was called a loser, then learned she owned his entire empire. Spencer disappeared through the doors, but the applause hadn't yet come. It began slowly after my next words. Today isn't about destruction, I said. It's about rebuilding. Behind me, the screen shifted again. Nexus will donate $10 million to create the Phoenix Foundation, I announced. The mission statement filled the display, scholarships and mentorship for women whose careers were derailed or dismissed. This foundation, I said, is for every woman who was told she was just a housewife while holding her world together. For every brilliant mind dismissed because it came in a dress. The applause started with the women, hesitant at first, then swelling until the room vibrated with it. In the third row, I saw Helen Delaney, tears glinting under the stage lights. She had been Robert's wife for 35 years, invisible at every company event, always introduced as someone's better half. After the meeting, she approached me, her voice barely above a whisper. I have a degree from Yale, she confessed. I was going to be a doctor, but Robert needed support for his career. And I disappeared. I placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to be invisible anymore, I told her softly. None of us do. Not with contributions from Catherine Whitmore, just Spencer, the man who took credit for my intellect while I took credit for keeping his home intact. I poured a glass of his prized 30-year-old Macallan, the one reserved for special occasions, and lifted it toward the stillness of the room, a quiet toast to the invisible woman who had, at last, become visible. The whiskey burned going down, but not nearly as deeply as the truth it accompanied. I had gained everything and lost everything in the same heartbeat. Triumph had a taste after all, ash, laced with money and memory, but ash nonetheless. At 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone vibrated. Grace's name illuminated the screen. Did I wake you? She asked. Of course, she knew I hadn't slept in days. What is it? I murmured. The board wants to move the emergency shareholder meeting to Friday, she explained. Same location as last week's dinner, the Marriott Grand Ballroom. They think being on familiar ground will give them the upper hand. I nearly laughed aloud. They wanted to return to the scene of my public humiliation, unaware they were offering me the perfect stage for their own undoing. Tell them yes, I said. And, Grace, make sure the press gets wind of it. I want every camera possible. Friday dawned beneath a wash of golden light, the universe's idea of irony. I dressed with precision, choosing a white Armani suit that had hung in my closet for years, waiting for courage to match it. Spencer had once told me it was too bold. That made it flawless for today. The Marriott's Grand Ballroom had transformed. Gone were the circular dinner tables and glimmering wine glasses that had once framed my humiliation. In their place stood 300 chairs, all facing a raised stage and a massive projection screen. Every eye would have a clear view of the reckoning. The space filled quickly. Shareholders murmured. Reporters adjusted tripods. CNN's camera lights flickered on, and the Wall Street Journal sent 3 correspondents. From behind the curtain, I caught sight of Spencer slipping into the back row, his head low, hoping to vanish when things turned ugly. He didn't yet understand this time. Ugliness was the point. At precisely 10 a.m., I stepped onto the stage. The rhythmic click of my heels struck the silence like a judge's gavel. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice calm but resonant. My name is Catherine Whitmore, and through Greystone Capital, I am the majority shareholder of Nexus Industries. Behind me, a slide appeared. Greystone Capital, 67% ownership. For 7 years, I said, I watched in silence while executives treated this company as their personal playground. I stayed quiet while they hollowed out its culture, turning it into a boys' club funded by my investment. Another click. Ethan Caldwell's Vegas receipts filled the screen, photos, invoices, even security footage. The same Ethan Caldwell who mocked me as a loser housewife last week spent $450,000 of company money on personal entertainment. Next came the evidence of Robert Delaney's fraudulent contracts, $3 million funneled into his brother-in-law's fake consulting firm. A chart followed, showing executive bonuses soaring while layoffs spiked. While 200 workers lost their jobs last Christmas, I said evenly, these men rewarded themselves with 7-figure bonuses. A wave of outrage rolled through the room. Phones rose like a forest of witnesses. Perfect. By midday, this would be everywhere. Effective immediately, I declared, Nexus Industries will be restructured from the ground up. New leadership. New culture. New integrity. From the press section, a reporter with a Wall Street Journal badge lifted her hand. Mrs. Whitmore, what about your husband's role in all this? My eyes found Spencer's across the crowd. 300 people separated us, but in that instant, the distance collapsed. 22 years of marriage distilled into one silent confrontation. Spencer Whitmore has submitted his resignation, I announced. An internal investigation confirmed he knowingly benefited from executive corruption while pretending ignorance. He began to rise, but I continued. Mr. Whitmore will receive no severance, no recommendations, and no golden parachute. The man who built his career on his wife's money, her contacts, and her strategies, while calling her a trophy, is no longer affiliated with Nexus Industries in any capacity. Dozens of cameras turned toward him as he froze mid-step. Gasps filled the room. Every lens captured his walk of shame toward the exit. Within minutes, the headline would spread, the executive who didn't know his wife owned the company. I turned back to the crowd. The business world deserves honesty, I said. They deserve to know the kind of man who laughs when his wife is called a loser, then learns she owns the empire he thought was his. Spencer vanished through the doors, but the applause had not yet started. It came slowly after my next words. Today is not about destruction, I told them. It's about reconstruction. Behind me, the screen changed again. Nexus Industries will donate $10 million to establish the Phoenix Foundation, I said. The slide displayed its mission, scholarships and mentorship for women whose ambitions were dismissed or derailed. This foundation, I continued, is for every woman who was told she was just a housewife while she kept her family alive. For every brilliant mind dismissed simply because it came in a dress. The clapping began with the women, hesitant at first, then building into a roar that filled the hall. In the third row, I saw Helen Delaney, her makeup streaked with tears. She had been Robert's wife for 35 years, polite, invisible, always introduced as someone's better half. After the meeting, she approached me, voice trembling. I have a degree from Yale, she said. I was supposed to be a doctor, but Robert needed someone to support his career. And I disappeared. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You don't have to be invisible anymore, I said softly. None of us do. I understand now what I took from you, Spencer said quietly. Not just your money or your ideas, but your identity, your dreams, 22 years of your life. His voice carried an honesty that might once have mattered, but now it met a hollow place in me. I felt no anger, no triumph, no flicker of the love that had once existed between us, only an emptiness where emotion used to live. "I'm glad you're learning," I replied, turning back toward the stage, already moving past him in every sense that mattered. After the ceremony, Lily found us standing several feet apart, like strangers connected only by history. Later, she told me that her father had taken a position at a small startup in Palo Alto, junior consultant, earning about what a recent college graduate would make. He lived in a studio apartment near the train station, took public transit to work, and flinched whenever someone asked about his past. The man who once laughed as I was called a loser now knew exactly what that word felt like. July arrived with the first gala of the Phoenix Foundation, held not at the Marriott, never again the Marriott, but in the gilded ballroom of the Ritz. 25 women stood beneath the chandeliers that night, living proof of transformation. Dr. Sarah Tran spoke first, steady and radiant. "I was a surgeon at 30, she said. By 35, I was changing diapers and being introduced as just a mom. The Phoenix Foundation gave me both the funding and the courage to return to medicine. Next month, I begin my residency at Mount Sinai." Then came Isabel Romero. "For 10 years, she said, I sketched designs for a medical device that could help premature infants. Between PTA meetings and soccer games, I kept the dream alive. The Foundation's grant let me file the patent. We go to market next quarter." One by one, their voices filled the room, stories of resurrection. Women who had been buried under other people's ambitions, clawing their way back to the surface. "You gave us permission to exist again," Sarah told me afterward, tears glimmering in her eyes. "To be more than someone's wife or mother. To remember the dreams we had before we had families." Their success, I realized, was my truest revenge. Not destroying Spencer, but creating something from the ashes of the woman I used to be. By August, I found myself alone in my Westchester mansion, wide awake at 2 a.m. The silence felt heavy, echoing through every room like an accusation. Spencer had taken nothing in the divorce, signing everything over without protest. Lily had moved to Seattle to begin her own career at a tech firm. I wandered through the house, the formal dining room where I'd hosted dinner parties for Spencer's colleagues who had never become my friends. The living room where I'd smiled through endless book clubs with women who now crossed the street to avoid me. At the country club, my name was whispered like a cautionary tale over champagne flutes. "Remember Spencer Whitmore's wife? She owned everything all along and destroyed him completely. They said Ethan Caldwell was delivering pizzas now." I poured a glass of the 2015 Chateau Margaux I had been saving for a special occasion that never came. Standing at the window, I looked out over the garden. The roses needed pruning. The fountain Spencer had installed for our 20th anniversary murmured softly in the dark. I was 62 years old, wealthy beyond measure, powerful beyond challenge, and completely alone. The friends who had filled this house had always been his friends. The social world I'd maintained had existed for his benefit, not mine. Without him, without the role of corporate wife, I was adrift, occupying a space I owned but no longer recognized. My phone lay silent on the counter. Only Grace called about legal matters, and Lily checked in to make sure I was eating. The women who once invited me to luncheons now feared me. The executives who once mocked me now avoided me. I had won every battle but lost the war for human connection. Still, as dawn brushed gold across the windows of my empty mansion, I found my thoughts returning to that night at the Marriott, Ethan's laughter, Spencer's smug grin, the moment I decided to stop being invisible. The price of visibility was isolation. The cost of revenge was solitude. And yet, as I raised my glass to the sunrise, I understood something deeper. I would do it all again. Because being feared and alone was still better than being loved and invisible. If this story of corporate revenge kept you on edge, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Catherine revealed she owned 67% of the company while they were still laughing at her. What was your favorite moment? Let me know in the comments below, and don't miss more powerful stories like this. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.